What's up, fellow nerds? I'm Doug. You ever wonder what a team led by Mando invading an Imperial facility looks like? Well, look no further than this week's episode of The Mandalorian.
What's up, everybody? I'm Keith, and please remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and share with all your friends, if you enjoy our content, of course.
And I am Dave, and this is Not Your Status Quos. 6 things that worked about The Mandalorian, Chapter 15, The Believer, and 2 that didn't.
Here we go.
Talking all things Chapter 15, The Believer of The Mandalorian. Remember, if you haven't seen this episode and you don't like spoilers, you might want to pause this, go watch the episode, and then come back and talk, because we're going to be talking all things Chapter 15. And we have 6 things that we believe worked about this episode, and the first one is the return of Bill Burr, Miggs Mayfield, who we last saw being locked up in a New Republic prison. And at the end of last episode, Din goes to his buddy Cardoon and says, hey, let's get this guy out. We need him for something. It's the kid.
If you guys remember in our last review, we were actually speculating, we're sitting there wondering, what could be the reason other than the fact that Bill Burr's character, Mayfield, other than the fact that he was former Imperial, what sort of use was he going to have? Like, what were they going to do with him? How is he going to be able to, become part of the team? What was he going to contribute? And we find out, and man, it was awesome.
I agree, Doug. And, there's something that does bother me, though. In the end, it turned out that they really kind of didn't need him because Mando took care of it. But they kind of did need him to get out. But I love how everything changed when they're talking to Mayfeld. Or is it Mayfeld or Mayfield? I think it's Mayfeld. When they're talking to him, and everything changes when they say they've got his kid. I love how everybody on this show, that changes the whole outlook for him. They're going to help Mando get the kid.
And the second thing that worked about this episode is Boba Fett's armor paint job. When he got off Slave One on that, prison planet or whatever, you could just see that he is a Mandalorian. He takes pride in that armor. And you can see it all shiny and spotless, except for the dent that Cad Bane put in his head. And you also see the Jaster Mariel's sigil on his shoulder right there. So I thought that was just, attention to detail was marvelous and so well done.
Not to mention that you can tell this armor really means a lot. He mentioned in the last episode that this belonged to his father and now belongs to him. So not only was it the fact that, this is part of the Mandalorian creed and the way of life, whether he wants to say that he, gives a creed to nobody anyway, but the fact that this armor is part of his lineage and, it's part of his family line, you can tell that this really means a lot to him. Not so much that he took such good care of it, but the fact that he was willing to basically put his life on the line in order to get it back, in helping Din get the child back, get Grogu back.
Another thing about it is, when did they have time to get it clean? Did they just scrub it as they were flying there, or did they have a oil bath like C-3PO got in A New Hope? I don't know. It's just kind of funny. If they had something like that on board Slave One, more power to you, buddy.
And the third thing that we think worked for this episode is, the conversation between Miggs and the Mandalorian while they're driving the Juggernaut. Not to be confused with the Juggernaut from the X-Men, of course. This is a giant transport carrying the rhydonium. But he says something that's very interesting. He says, we always have our code, or we always have our line that we won't cross until things get messy. And if that wasn't foreshadowing things that were going to happen later in the episode, nothing does.
Seriously, because when's the last time you found yourself cheering for a TIE fighter to take somebody out, or the Empire to cover your ass? When's the last time that happened? So they hate him, and then they bail him out, and of course they're going to be they're going to be happy about it. So things got messy.
And I mean, one of those things that got messy was, Miggs not willing to go to that terminal because his old officer was sitting there. So, and of course it needed a facial scan. So what did Din do? He took off his helmet because he values Grogu more than he does that creed at this point. The ends are going to justify the means. Did he break the creed? He did. But is it going to, be the right decision in the end? I mean, I certainly think so. And the fourth thing that worked of The Mandalorian, Chapter 15, was the drink scene with Mayfield, Din, and Mayfield's former officer. And a couple things about it. I mean, it was a very well acted scene, back and forth. You see, Miggs's irritation, rising. We see the officer kind of questioning what's going on. We see Din sort of shaking his head like, hey, let's just keep the peace so we can get out of here. And for those of you that don't know, a little side note, Operation Cinder was from Battlefront 2. So not only are, Favreau and Filoni bringing in stuff from movies and books and everything else, they're also bringing in things from the video games. And once it did, it was so well done, so seamless into the story that, they just know they get fan service and they do it right.
Keith mentioned that the computer has to scan your face, but apparently you don't have to have clearance, because when Din gets his face scanned, the computer doesn't shut down or anything. He's not a member of the Empire, so apparently it just needs a face. Maybe it's just recording who did it so they can look at it later. And I thought another funny part was the TPS reports it's a nice callback. Like Favreau's so good at doing to Office Space. Another thing that they did in this scene was they called Mando. They said to call him Brown Eyes, which is very much like the clones back in the Clone Wars, when they used to call Fives and Wolf, and each clone had a different name, except for like Rex and Cody were like the leaders, so they had the real names, but everyone else had a nickname, this was a nice callback to that.
And the fifth thing that worked was Boba Fett using that seismic charge against those TIE fighters. I mean, everyone has been waiting for him to use that, and it was so well placed in this episode. Unfortunately, were those the same TIE fighters that saved Miggs and Din at the beginning of this episode?
Yeah, as much as I dislike the prequels, and I will say that all day, it was still a really nice callback, and it definitely reminded me of watching episode 2 in the theaters, and I was just like, oh yeah, that. By the way, I hated that movie.
And the sixth and final thing that we thought that worked for this episode was the end with Din's message to Moff Gideon, which was almost word for word what Moff Gideon had said to him in chapter 7 of The Mandalorian. And if this doesn't get you excited for chapter 16 and the season 2 season finale, then I don't know what to tell you.
I love it because Gideon actually looks, like concerned. He's not looking at Mando like he did in the end of season 1, where he was just like a kind of a joke to him, like, like, if you don't come out of there, I'm going to kill you anyway. When he saw that hologram, he looked concerned, like, oh man, this guy made it out. He's coming after me.
Yeah, Dave is totally spot on with that. I thought the same thing. I'm watching him watch the hologram, and it wasn't even just him, his comms officer that ran up saying that, hey, you've got to see this, and showed it to him. She looked kind of frightened too. So I'm wondering, if now they have more intel on him, more information on what he's been doing. And now they're like, oh man, I think we actually need to worry about this guy.
And now the things that we think didn't work. And there's only 2 of them, and one of them's pretty picky, I know. And the first one is the varying times to detonate on those thermal detonators while the indigenous people were attacking the juggernaut that Miggs and Din were driving. The first one, as soon as he got to it, he threw it, it exploded. The second one, he had placed it, and like a lot of time had passed. He's throwing spears, he's doing all this stuff. And then eventually he got over to it and exploded. I know it's picky, but it's still, while I was watching, I was just kind of like,
You really weren't the only one who thought that, Keith. I was thinking the same exact thing on my first watch through of the episode. I was actually, I wasn't watching the really awesome fight that's taking place on the screen in front of me. Instead, I'm sitting there thinking, shouldn't that have blown up by now?
And the second thing that didn't work for us was Mayfeld blowing up that building at the end of the episode. Sure, it was cool. We all enjoyed seeing him get his revenge. But what about the families of those people? Shouldn't he have warned the stormtroopers to get out of there possibly before that?
I'm one of the ones who doesn't agree. I think that Mayfeld blowing up as he left was avenging his fallen brethren that he was describing in the episode, and he was making sure that this rhydonium is not used again for something similar. So I think that, and as he says as he walks away, it helps him sleep at night. It was just some unfinished business that he had, helped him sleep at night. So if he's killing these people, these stormtroopers who are somehow, that now we're looking at him as human in this episode, then they're conspiring to do what was done in Operation Cinder. So he doesn't have a problem taking them out.
The reason why I had a little bit of issue with it, and the reason why I think he could have at least warned his fellow stormtroopers or former fellow storm, I know he wasn't a stormtrooper, but he could have warned the just your average run-of-the-mill grunts to kind of get out of there. He did, in my opinion, get his revenge when he shot his former officer. Yeah, he hit him square with his blaster. And yes, I totally agree. I think that they needed to blow up that building. They needed to get rid of the ore before it was used for any nefarious purposes, whether it was to fuel a ship that was going to take over another planet that should be held by the Republic, or whether it was going to be used for an explosive or some other, Operation Cinder Part 2. Who knows what the Imperial regiments were going to do with it. Either way, it did need to be destroyed. But to me, it reminded me too much of one of the issues that I took with A Force Awakens, where we've got Finn suffering from PTSD after watching one of his fellow stormtroopers die in front of him, and he's thinking, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I got to get out. I don't want to be part of the First Order anymore. And Mayfeld almost says basically the same thing. He mentions that when he's, talking to his former officer, he says, yeah, what about all of my fellow troops? What about all the people that were on the planet? What about all of their families, their children? So to me, that kind of implies that he wasn't just talking about the civilian folks living on the planet, but I think he was also talking about all of the troops and all of the other forces that he worked with, that he served with in the Empire. And so that's why I feel like maybe prior to them leaving, it would have made a little bit more sense for his character development if he would have sent them off rather than being like Finn was in The Force Awakens, gleefully shooting and blasting stormtroopers an hour after crying about how he had to leave the First Order because one of his fellow stormtroopers died. That's just my take on it.
And now our reviews for Chapter 15, The Believer. And to me, what could have been a throwaway filler episode turned into a very thoughtful and heavy character study that offers further depth to both Din and ex-Imperial sharpshooter, not stormtrooper, Migs. While it's lacking, the spectacle and nostalgic glee of the most recent two episodes, and personally, I love the fact that this episode has used a character that originated in The Mandalorian, and seeing the lengths that Din will go to rescue Grogu. The Believer is an entertaining and dynamically directed installment that shows us a different side of the Empire and further contextualizes the state of the galaxy after the Emperor's defeat. And that is why I'm giving this episode an 8.9 out of 10.
I almost mostly agree with Keith. I thought this was an excellent episode. I did not see it as a filler episode at all. I thought that the things that we mentioned in this video, the things that worked, really worked. And the things that didn't work were so minor that they were almost not even worth mentioning. I think Keith even said they were a little bit nitpicky, and I kind of agree. I think that the things that we picked out, they were pretty nitpicky. It was hard to find things that didn't work about this episode. The fact that we get some character growth for Din Djarin, the fact that he goes from full on Mandalorian, gotta live by the creed, the way that he was in season 1, now to, hey, I got to take off my helmet. I've got to wear stormtrooper armor, and then I've got to take off my helmet and let other living people see my face, just so I can save Grogu, save my, my foundling that, I'm basically the father of. To me, that is some serious character growth. And in only the second season, we're seeing this guy grow. And I thought that was excellent. I really loved watching the action scenes. It was like action nonstop, and it was great. Having 2 episodes back to back that were chock full of action was excellent. And even though it did lead to my little bit of a nitpick there at the end, I actually kind of enjoyed the idea that they almost humanized the stormtroopers a bit when Din and Migs were rolling in with their cargo, and you saw them all cheering and just hanging out and chilling out in this facility, and it's like, oh, That's right. Those are humans underneath those helmets and suits. And sometimes you forget about that in Star Wars. So I am going to give this one a 9.5 out of 10. I know it's high, but I really thoroughly enjoyed this episode. And I am really looking forward to the next one, the season finale. Can't wait to see how it's all going to be wrapped up.
I thought that Pedro Pascal, going off the show and into the talent of the acting, I thought he did a great job because you realize what he's been looking like underneath the mask when he doesn't speak, and when he did it on this show without the mask, it it portrayed the same emotions. So I thought that was a great job for Pedro. I just realized that Cara Dune's tattoo under her eye right there, which I thought was a beauty mark or something. I just realized it was a tattoo of the New Republic. So check that out if you can. Overall, this episode was it was great. It was fantastic. I didn't see, like Doug was saying, all the stuff that we loved was awesome, and the stuff that didn't work was it. We were, like Heath said, a little nitpicky on it. So it's just, this show just keeps going up and up and up. So I agree with them. I'm gonna go with a 9 out of 10. Incredible show. So that's what we thought. That's what our positives and negatives are. What were yours? Go ahead and leave some comments, and we'd love to interact with you. And until next time, thanks for watching Not Your Status Quo.